I was the pen that Abraham Lincoln used to abolish slavery, American Civil War. I was not born in a grand factory, but in the modest workshop of Samuel Harrison, a craftsman who believed that words could change the world. My iron nib was forged from metal, salvaged from an old church bell. Steel that had once called congregations to worship would now call a nation to conscience. Samuel selected my shaft from a goose who had soared across both north and south, as if fate knew I would one day help heal that divide. The workshop smelled of metal shavings and hope. Samuel's weathered hands worked with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a poet. Each stroke of his hammer was deliberate, each file mark a prayer. Outside, the sounds of war preparation echoed through the capital, marching feet rolling. Cannons, the clatter of supply wagons heading south. Yet in this small sanctuary, creation bloomed amid destruction. My first memory is of being placed in President Lincoln's hand for the first time. His fingers were surprisingly gentle for someone carrying such weight on his shoulders. The lamplight caught the deep lines etched around his eyes, canyons carved by sleepless nights and impossible decisions. I felt the tremor in his grip, not from fear, but from the magnitude of decisions pressing down on him like storm clouds. That first evening I noticed everything. The way his office smelled of leather and old parchment. How the gaslight flickered shadows across the walls lined with books and maps. The steady tick of the clock that seemed to count not just hours, but the heartbeats of a dying nation. Lincoln would walk to the window, staring out at the Potomac, where campfires dotted the Virginia hills like fallen stars. Each light represented hundreds of soldiers, boys really, sleeping under alien skies. Maps covered every surface marked with blue and gray pins that told the story of a nation tearing itself apart. Richmond lay stubbornly beyond reach while casualty reports arrived, daily like death sentences. The Union was bleeding from 1,000 wounds, and somewhere in that chaos, millions of souls remained in chains, their freedom hanging by threads thinner than hope itself. We practiced writing together, simple words at first, his signature, notes to generals. But I could feel something greater stirring within him, a declaration waiting to be born, like thunder in distant clouds. Sometimes Mary would enter, her silk dress rustling against the doorframe. She would bring him coffee in a china cup, her hands steady where his trembled. In those quiet moments between the chaos, her presence would ease the tension in his shoulders, if only briefly. Late at night, when the city slept and only the guards remained vigilant, Lincoln would pull out scraps of paper. He would dip me carefully in the inkwell and begin writing fragments of ideas. Shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. The words came haltingly at first, like water through parched earth, but each phrase carried the weight of generations. Summer. 1862, the White House summer brought no relief from the war's brutality. If anything, the heat seemed to intensify everything. The stench of the hospitals, the desperation of the refugees, the bitter debates that raged in the cabinet room. News of battles arrived like biblical plagues. Antietam's corpse-strewn fields, Shiloh's blood-soaked waters, 23,000 casualties in a single day. Numbers that meant little until you saw Lincoln's face crumple with each telegram. I watched him age before my eyes, each defeat adding years, each victory purchased. With such blood that celebration felt obscene, his cabinet members filed in and out like actors in a tragic play. Seward, the diplomat always calculating political costs, Stanton, the war hawk, pushing for total mobilization, Chase, the treasurer, worrying about funding this seemingly endless conflict. The border states, they would argue, voices rising, above the summer thunder. Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, we cannot afford to alienate them now. They're holding the Union together by threads. I felt Lincoln's grip tighten around me during these debates. He would trace meaningless patterns on paper, his mind wrestling with the contradiction between political necessity and moral imperative. The enslaved millions could not wait for the perfect moment, but would premature action doom the Union itself? It was a paradox worthy of Solomon. How do you save democracy by potentially destroying the very coalition holding it together? The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the states fighting for union still practiced human bondage. One sweltering July evening, after a particularly heated cabinet meeting, Lincoln remained alone in his office. The air hung thick and still, broken only by the distant sound of artillery practice from the forts surrounding the city. He pulled out a piece of legal paper, not the fine stationery used for official documents, but the simple yellow foolscap he preferred for drafting. His hand trembled slightly as he dipped me in the inkwell. The ink was warm, almost fever-hot in the stifling air. "I shall try to correct errors when I have the final draft," he murmured to himself, words meant for no one yet echoing with the weight of prophecy. Those first tentative words appeared. That on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, he stopped suddenly, set me down, and walked to the window again. Outside, a group of contraband slaves worked in the garden, freed by proximity to Union lines, but still uncertain of their ultimate fate. Children played between the rows of vegetables, their laughter a sharp contrast to the gravity inside these walls. Lincoln returned to his desk, picked me up, and continued writing. I felt the weight of history flowing through the ink like molten metal taking shape. Each word was a step toward either glory or catastrophe. This was no ordinary proclamation. It was a turning point, a moment when moral courage would either triumph or be crushed under the wheels of pragmatism and political expediency. The words flowed now. All persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the united. States shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free, forever. The words seemed to hang in the air like incense. As he wrote, servants moved quietly through the halls, many of them freed slaves who had made their way to Washington. Their very presence was testament to the hunger for liberty that no law could long suppress. Outside, the city slept fitfully, unaware that in this lamplit room, the future was being written one careful word at a time. New Year's Day, 1863, the White House. January 1st dawned clear and sharp, the kind of winter morning that makes every sound crisp and every breath visible. But the clarity of the day could not disguise the weight of what was to come. I lay on Lincoln's desk in the Blue Room, surrounded by the accoutrements of ceremony, the brass inkstand, polished to mirror brightness, the sand shaker, waiting to blot fresh ink, the heavy parchment that would carry these words across a continent. And through history, the morning had been a trial by endurance. The New Year's reception stretched for hours, an endless parade of diplomats, generals, politicians, and citizens. Lincoln stood in the receiving line like a statue, his large hand engulfing those offered to him, his face a map of cordial exhaustion. I watched from my place as hundreds passed by, some with hope in their eyes, others with barely concealed hostility. Among the visitors, I noticed Frederick Douglass speaking intently with Senator Charles Sumner. Their eyes kept drifting toward the door behind which I waited. Word had spread quickly through the capital's networks. Today would bring either emancipation or disappointment. The very air seemed to vibrate with anticipation and anxiety. When Secretary of State Seward arrived with the final engrossed copy, the room fell silent. Even the servants paused in their duties. The document was magnificent, hand-lettered by calligraphers, each word a work of art. Lincoln examined it carefully, his lawyer's mind checking every phrase, every comma, every capital letter. This was law now, not just policy, and precision mattered. Then something unexpected happened. "My right arm is stiff and numb," he said quietly, flexing his fingers. "It has been shaking hands all morning, and if my hand trembles when I sign, people might say I hesitated." The admission hung in the air. Here was the most powerful man in America, reduced to the simple human concern about what others might think. He walked to the window, working his shoulder, rolling his wrist. Outside, groups of people had gathered despite the cold, their breath forming clouds as they spoke in hushed tones. Word was spreading through the city like wildfire. The signing was imminent. In the distance, the Capitol dome rose majestically, its new iron construction, a symbol of a nation rebuilding itself even as it fought. Returning to the desk, Lincoln picked me up with deliberate care. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the blue damask walls. "I never felt more certain of doing right than I do in signing this paper," he declared, and his voice carried across generations. The moment the nib touched parchment, I felt it. Not just the beginning of words, but the end of an era. The scratch of metal on paper was the only sound, but it echoed like thunder. Each letter formed slowly, deliberately, each curve and line a small act of courage. Abraham Lincoln. No presidential flourish, no unnecessary strokes. Just a name that would forever be linked with freedom. The ink flowed like liberation itself, dark and permanent and irreversible. When he finished, Lincoln set me down gently and stared at his signature. The deed was done. 4 million souls had just stepped from bondage toward freedom, though the journey would be long and bloody still, the years that followed and beyond. The ink had barely dried when the world began to change. Word of emancipation spread like wildfire across the South, carried by Union soldiers who sang as they marched, whispered in slave quarters where hope had been a dangerous luxury, shouted in the streets of northern cities where church bells rang. Out the news. In the months that followed, I remained Lincoln's faithful companion. I helped him write the Gettysburg Address, feeling each carefully chosen word reshape the nation's purpose. 77 years ago, those words flowed through me with the same reverence as the proclamation itself. We stood together in that cemetery, surrounded by the graves of boys who would never see the freedom they had died to preserve. I penned letters to grieving mothers, watching tears fall onto the paper as Lincoln wrote, "I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement." Strategic communications flowed to generals, each order moving thousands of men like pieces on a chessboard. And always words that sought to heal a wounded nation. The 13th Amendment came later, abolishing slavery completely and forever. I helped draft that too, feeling the weight of permanence in every clause. The proclamation had been a war measure. This would be eternal law. As Lincoln signed it, I felt we had come full circle, from emergency action to constitutional permanence. That terrible April night in 1865, I felt the tremor that ran through the White House when the news came from Ford's Theater. Lincoln would write no more, speak no more, but the words we had crafted together would echo through eternity. As he lay dying, others quoted his words, "With malice toward none, with charity for all. Freedom, once given voice, cannot be silenced." I had written words that freed 4 million souls, and in doing so, we had freed the nation itself from the contradiction that had nearly destroyed it. I have passed through many hands since then. Historians, collectors, those who understand that I am more than metal and ink. I have watched America stumble and rise, watched the descendants of those I helped free achieve heights their ancestors could barely dream. I've seen Thurgood Marshall argue before the Supreme Court, Rosa Parks take her seat, Martin Luther King speak of dreams on the Capitol steps. The battle for equality continues, but the foundation was laid that January day, when trembling hands became steady, when moral courage overcame political caution. Each generation has taken up the work, understanding that freedom is not a destination, but a journey, not a gift, but a responsibility. I've seen the original parchment of the proclamation displayed in museums, watched children of all colors press their faces to the glass, reading those words that once flowed through me. Their eyes widen with understanding. Someone like them was once property, and someone like Lincoln decided that was wrong. In quiet moments, I remember Samuel Harrison's workshop, the smell of metal and hope, the sound of his hammer singing freedom into my very essence. I think of Lincoln's gentle hands, the way his shoulders carried the weight of a nation, the moment he chose conscience over convenience. In the end, I learned that the mightiest weapon against injustice is not the sword, but the pen, guided by a conscience that refuses to stay silent. Words written with conviction and signed with courage can indeed change the world, and sometimes, just sometimes, they can set millions free. The document I signed still exists, faded now, but unbroken. It hangs as a reminder that in America's darkest hour, when the nation's soul was on trial, one man took one pen and chose the harder but holier path. The ink may fade, but the words remain, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free, forever. It was true then, it remains true now. And as long as there are people who remember, as long as there are those who still believe in the power of words to change the world, it will always be true. The pen may be mightier than the sword, but only when wielded by hands brave enough to write justice into existence. That January day, we did just that, and the echoes of that moment still ring through history. A bell of freedom that once struck can never be silenced.